was born by God's dear grace in an extraordinary place where the stars and
Hi everybody, welcome to Fox and Friends, a special edition. We have for the last 17 years marked what happened 17 years ago today in Lower Manhattan in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and our nation's capital, with a special program remembering some of the things that happened. And in fact, there are certain images that are so powerful, we only show them once a year. And this morning, we're going to show them.
Every year, we walk you through exactly the timeline of what happened on September 11th, 17 years ago, and we, of course, will do the same thing today.
They did a remarkably sensitive, insightful job with the museum there, with the reflecting pool that you're staring at now, and finally, 17 years later, almost all the rebuilding is done, or they're very much, they're very close. They finally fixed the subway station that was destroyed on 9/11 17 years later. Sadly, we're also talking about some of the cancers that those working on the pile to save as many lives as possible and to clean up down there. People are still suffering. It's almost like a time bomb went off that day. And we heard about that yesterday, and you'll hear about that more today. I also think it's important to not only go back over the moments when the attacks happened, but also the moments of silence. There'll be 6 moments of silence today when both towers fell, when the Pentagon was hit, when both towers were hit, as well as when the Flight 93 went down.
And in fact, this hour at 6:45, we will take you down to Washington, D.C., to the Pentagon, where every year we see them unfurl a gigantic flag on the west front of the Pentagon, which was partially collapsed. And it was there that 125 men and women who worked in the Pentagon were killed.
That's right, and 40 were killed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and that's where the president will be today. We will be taking that live when he's there. They just built the Tower of Voices, which is beautiful. It's 40 wind chimes, and you can hear the wind chimes to represent the voices of the 40 people who lost their lives. We'll be covering that all morning, but we also need to get to this Fox News alert as well. 4 states declaring emergencies now as Hurricane Florence is heading for the East Coast. More than 1 million people ordered to evacuate in the Carolinas, in Virginia, and Maryland.
All right, the Category 4 storm, which could be a 5 soon, is expected to cause catastrophic damage when it makes landfall later this week.
Todd Pyro is live in Wilmington, North Carolina, where preparations are underway today. Todd, I understand that in South Carolina they are expecting 1 million people to hit the road and get out of town. How about North Carolina?
Steve, Ainsley, and Brian, good morning to you. Steve, that is exactly right. 1 million in South Carolina. We don't yet have an official number from North Carolina where we are here, but as you can see, we're between 48 and 72 hours of this storm hitting, and already buildings boarded up. And this isn't just a scene here along the shore where we are. About 15 minutes inland during our drive here today, we saw a lot of buildings already boarded up. There's already been some flooding in the Outer Banks, but of course the focus yesterday and over the next few days is preparation ahead of Florence's direct hit. People throughout Virginia and the Carolinas getting their homes ready, but it's also a time to protect and prepare not just your property, but yourself. Some folks already encountering empty shelves as they stock up on supplies, and gas lines already starting to get long as people fill up, not knowing how long they will have to be in their cars trying to evacuate. Even the Navy making sure its fleet in the area is in calmer waters. All this preparation is vital, says officials like the governor here in North Carolina.
One of the things that will be potentially different and more impactful with the storm are the high winds and the storm surge. So we encourage people to abide by evacuation orders that are issued by local counties and do not try to ride out these storms.
Even the president weighing in on the magnitude of Florence, tweeting to the incredible citizens of North Carolina, South Carolina, and the entire East Coast, the storm looks very bad. Please take all necessary precautions. We have already begun mobilizing our assets to respond accordingly, and we are here for you. Parts of North and South Carolina, as well as Virginia, already under evacuation orders that begin in less than an hour from now. States of emergency declared in those 3 states as well as Maryland. Back to you.
All right, thanks, Todd. I think one of the most important things, underrated things, is book your hotel now. You're going to be competing with 1 million people to book a hotel. And don't do it for 1 day. Do it for 5 days.
What do you mean? Wherever you're evacuating, wherever you're going?
Go find a hotel, and you got to go book it because you're going to be sold out in a nanosecond.
But so many people can't afford a hotel, and that's why in South Carolina in particular, I think there are 26 states, 26 counties where they have already closed the schools, and they've closed the state public buildings to make them available as shelters. Now, in that live report, Todd was just talking about the storm surge, and Janice Dean's joining us right now as she tracks Florence. They're saying where the storm comes ashore, the surge could be 10 feet, which for those barrier islands is catastrophic.
I read 20 feet in one article.
A foot right now, up to a foot right now, depending on where the storm makes landfall. And it's the right front quadrant that you get the worst of the rain and the winds and the storm surge. Storm surge advisories have been posted. That's new. Also, hurricane watches are now up for the Carolinas. So we're going to get advisories every 3 hours now because the watches are up. Category 4, overnight the storm has gone through restructuring. We call it an eye wall replacement cycle. And all that means is these very strong hurricanes like to try to strengthen more. So one eye wall is replacing the smaller eye. And that is a sign that we might get a 5 today. So category 4 right now, 140 mile per hour sustained winds. You can see that restructuring happening on the satellite presentation. So that all that tells me is this storm is getting stronger. Hurricane watches have just been posted now. So that is, that's another sign that we're getting closer to a landfall. Right now we expect Thursday, Friday. Some of the computer models, though, are slowing the storm down before landfall. So this now is Friday morning, overnight Thursday, Friday, and look at what happens. That's Sunday. The storm stalls. So remember Hurricane Harvey last year, Southeast Texas? I am so concerned that this is going to stall and dump epic, historic amounts of rainfall, not only along the coast, but inland. So I feel nervous again this morning with this storm system. This is going to be historic, possibly a storm they've never, ever seen before across South Carolina, North Carolina, and Virginia right now.
Janice, we're used to these types of storms in the Carolinas. I grew up there, but not ones that are this large.
Large
this is
and
category 4, possibly a 5. That's extremely scary.
Yes, and the problem is, Ainsley, a lot of these storms just kind of make landfall and get picked up by a cold front, a trough.
Right.
This one has nothing to steer it.
Right.
So like Harvey last year, sitting and spinning and bringing all of this moisture from the Atlantic, that could be absolutely devastating, certainly potentially life-threatening.
Hats off to Governor McMaster for going ahead and evacuating that area. There was one governor that waited too late, and they didn't reverse the lanes on I-26 and some of the highways that were going in and out of Charleston, and it caused a huge mess. People were stuck in traffic, running out of gas, and so this governor is taking heed and learning from those mistakes of the past.
We've got some time, but it's running out.
And thank you very much, Janice. And in fact, the 4 main highways from the coast are one way only today to get those 1 million people inland where it's going to be safe.
Meanwhile, at 8 minutes after the hour, it's safe today. It wasn't safe 17 years ago. Pete Hegseth is downtown, which was where right where the World Trade Center once stood, and has since been replaced by the Freedom Tower and some other building in that complex. 17 years later, Pete, has anything begun to stir downtown?
Yeah, Brian, Steve, and Ainsley, it's such an honor to have this assignment. I'm right next to the West Side Highway, just in the shadow of what is now the Freedom Tower. And you watch these cars coming in, people coming to work, and it can't help but make you think about 17 years ago, the men and women driving in to work, not in any way could they have anticipated what was coming for them that day. And the lives of the families and friends and our whole country affected 17 years later. There's going to be a ceremony, as there is always here in about an hour. It kicks off. The families will start arriving. And then, as you mentioned, Brian, it'll start with bagpipes and the national anthem promptly right at 8:42. And then there'll be 6 moments of silence, starting with when the North Tower was hit at 8:46. They'll start reading the names. And then there's moments of silence for when the South Tower was hit, when the Pentagon was hit, when the South Tower fell, when Flight 93 went down in Shanksville with the heroes there, and then, of course, when the North Tower went down at 10:28. The reading of the names, anticipated to be done by about noon, ended with the playing of taps, which always puts shiver up my spine. A day we will never forget, and I appreciate the opportunity to bring to life and make sure people remember that the price of freedom is eternal vigilance, and we certainly remember that this morning.
You know, 17 years after we went to battle, about 6 weeks later, we were hunting down bin Laden and trying to get al-Qaeda out of Afghanistan. 17 years later, big story in the Times on Sunday, how we're really not making much progress there. But you talk to somebody like Senator Graham, he says every day there's not an attack is because we went into Afghanistan and we made sure it wasn't a terror haven. How do you view this?
You know, I mean, we had to go in, obviously, and disrupt them. The Taliban harboring al-Qaeda quickly kicked out that regime, but al-Qaeda then slinkered into Pakistan, reconfigured, and along with the Taliban, and came back into Afghanistan. You know, I served there in 2011, in 2012. I went in optimistic, hoping the mission could be successful. I left a lot more pessimistic than I did. Standing up a utopian national government and Afghan army has proved very difficult. The Taliban controls much of the countryside. Now, as you know, we're beginning possible peace talks with the Taliban. You can't allow a harbor for al-Qaeda and the Taliban, but you also can't endlessly invest billions and trillions of dollars in a place where, you know, Afghanistan's basically biblical times with AK-47s and cell phones. You can't remake it, but you can prevent Islamists from taking control. Remember, Ayman al-Zawahiri, the number 2 to bin Laden, still alive, still giving speeches and hoping to reform that organization, so we have to be strong.
That's a good point. All right, Pete Hegseth down near Ground Zero.
Thank you for serving.
Yeah, why is Zawahiri alive?
I don't know.
I don't even think we're hunting him. The evil pediatrician.
All right, it is 6:11 now on 9/11, and Jillian joins us for the news.
That's right. Good morning. Following a number of stories, starting with this, a Fox News alert. The Afghan Taliban reportedly ready for new peace talks with the U.S. According to Reuters, that could include discussing a possible prisoner swap. A State Department representative met with Taliban officials back in July in hopes of making progress to end the 17-year conflict. The wife of a Marine murdered in cold blood is pleading for answers. 21-year-old Marine Corps Sergeant Christopher Truax was found with a gunshot wound to the head inside a parked car in San Diego. Truax's wife, Alexia, says she will continue to search for clues as investigators offer a $1,000 reward for information. Truax leaves behind a young son who turns 1 year old this week. 2 more U.S. service members have been identified from the remains returned from North Korea. The identities were made using DNA samples matching chest x-rays and dental records. This comes as the White House confirms a second summit between President Trump and Kim Jong-un is in the works. President Trump recently receiving a letter from the North Korean leader requesting that follow-up meeting. And Oakland Raiders running back Marshawn Lynch, the latest NFL player to protest the national anthem. Lynch taking a seat on the bench during the Star-Spangled Banner before his team faced the Los Angeles Rams, Raiders losing 33-13. And in his NFL debut, Jets rookie quarterback Sam Darnold shakes off a rough start to throw a pair of touchdowns. The Jets shredding the Detroit Lions 48-17. Send it back to you guys.
Can you believe the Jets pulled that off?
It's not even close.
Right. It's on the road.
A little shaky in the beginning.
Yep.
All right. Thank you, Jillian. Straight ahead, House Republicans unveiling tax reform 2.0, but this time around, they're looking to make some of those tax cuts permanent. Stuart Varney on deck with what that means to you, coming up next.
And he went to West Point after 9/11 knowing he was going to face war. And now 17 years later, he's a combat vet and a U.S. Senate candidate. He will help us all remember 9/11.
House Republicans introducing Tax Cuts 2.0, the new plan seeking to permanently lock in some of last year's temporary tax cuts.
And with the election day just 8 weeks away, could this give Republicans a boost in the midterms?
Here to react, Stuart Varney, host of Varney & Company on Fox Business Network, 9 to noon. So let's make it permanent. Can they do this?
Well, first of all, it is designed to give Republicans a lift in the midterms. It's designed to remind voters that it is the Republican tax cuts that created this great economy. What they're trying to do is, one, make these tax cuts for individuals permanent. In other words, they're not going to go away ever. They're permanent. Number two, make it easier for small businesses to introduce a 401k pension plans for their workers. And number three, more write-offs for small business startups. All of this would be good for the economy, but it is primarily politically motivated. Remind people, it's the Trump tax cuts that have given us this economy.
And so what they're trying to do is they're trying to put every Democrat in the House and maybe the Senate on the record voting against it before the midterms.
Whether or not the Senate takes this up is very much in question. I mean, you've got, what, 8 weeks to the actual election? The Senate is not likely to take up this bill. It is, I'm not going to call it window dressing, but it is politically motivated. Get the message out there.
I watched Kevin Hassard yesterday come out with his charts, economic advisor, and just show you what the Trump economy is as opposed to the Obama economy. To me, and I even watched the follow-up questions, outside the debt, which he blamed on the child tax credit, which he says was a Democratic plan, he says that this has been all Trump.
Well, he's right. If you look at those charts, this is Obama, this is Trump. And that cutoff point at the bottom of the V, that's the election of Donald Trump. That's the tax cuts that we had. President Obama had been trying to say that, look, this recovery started with my administration. You've got to give some credit to my administration for the current state of the economy. Well, I really disagree with that, because the economy really started to pick up steam when the president deregulated industry and when the president cut taxes. It's a very clear straight up from there on out.
Stuart, today is 9/11, and we want to reflect and remember those who died on this day 17 years ago. Where were you?
I was at home. I was watching Fox and Friends. I saw your coverage. And when the second plane hit, 9:02 was it, Eastern Time?
Shortly after 9.
John Scott called it terrorism. I immediately went to my children's elementary school. I had 2 kids in elementary school at that time, and the doors were locked. And I spoke to the principal, and he said, look, this is a security precaution. We're not going to let the kids be taken home. We don't want any kind of panic. Lessons will continue as normal. And that's what we did.
Was that Manhattan?
No, that was in New Jersey.
It was. Yes. It's the same thing at my kid's school. The doors weren't locked, but they just kept on as if it were a regular day, and then the parents would start to come from Lower Manhattan and elsewhere to pick up the kids if they could.
At my children's school, they had told the children that something dramatic had happened without scaring them, and then continued as normal.
Do they remember
did exactly the right thing.
Sure.
Yes, they do remember it. Yeah,
as we all do.
All right, Stuart, thanks. We'll watch you from 9 to noon on FBN.
Thank you.
Meanwhile, our next guest lost his cousin and witnessed September 11th attacks himself. He shares his thoughts 17 years later.
This program is sponsored by USAA.
For you, Senator Bernie Sanders pushing for universal health care.
Health care is a right of all people, not a privilege.
Well, now it seems like he wants universal child care. Sanders tweeting, child care should not cost parents more than sending their kids to college. We need a revolution in child care in this country. And here's an idea that Bernie might be able to get behind. A small Swiss village is giving free basic income the green light. But there's just one problem. They can't afford it. The village is called Rheinau, and it's along the German border. It plans to use crowdfunding to finance the plan that amounts to about $2,500 US per person. Steve?
Good luck with that. All right, behind every victim of the September 11th attacks is an important story. We will never forget that day, and 17 years later, we continue to honor the 2,977 people who lost their lives 17 years ago. One of those victims was that man right there, Steve Schlag, who worked in the North Tower of the World Trade Center. His cousin, Joe Connor, was in the city that day and witnessed the attack. And he joins us right now with his message for Americans 17 years later. He joins us today from Minneapolis. Joe, good morning to you.
Good morning, Steve. Thanks for having me on.
I know it's tough for you, but take us back 17 years ago. You were at work, weren't you?
Yeah, I commuted through the World Trade Center every day for just one day short of 13 years. And I was at my desk, and I was plugging in my laptop when one of my colleagues made a noise, and as I turned around, I saw the side of the World Trade Center explode, the North Tower, and a fireball and what looked to me like a giant air conditioner sort of ripped through, and then I saw papers fluttering in the wind, and I looked at my own desk and thought, my God, all these things that people thought were so important to them are now just exposed. And we never dreamed that the Trade Center would collapse.
Right.
But I picked up the phone and I tried to call my cousin Steve. He works for Cantor Fitzgerald, and I left him a voicemail saying, "Hey Schlag, I hope you're okay. Like, I don't know if you're in the North Tower or the South Tower." His card said World Trade Center 1, and obviously he never got home that night.
Back then the conventional wisdom was all of the people in both towers were told by the fire department, stay at your desk because we're going to come and get you. Because in '93, when there was a terror attack with a bomb in the basement, the buildings didn't collapse. Nobody, like you said, nobody ever thought they would collapse. And that's why it was so shocking when they did. And, you look at the numbers, and they're unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, I know that people who worked there in '93 also knew, though, that the smoke came up through both buildings in '93. So a lot of people in the South Tower left immediately, even against the advice of their companies and fire department. They got out because they knew both buildings were so intertwined.
Right.
So a lot of people's lives were saved because of that day. Yeah.
Joe, the day before September the 11th, 2001, you actually started to write the story that would eventually become a book about your father. And you specifically did not speak to your cousin that night before, did you?
No, it was 2 years exactly to the day before, September 10th, 1999, the terrorists that murdered my father, Steve's godfather. My father was murdered by the FALN terrorists at Francis Tavern. They were released. They walked out of jail from the clemencies from the Clintons. And I wanted to start writing about that. So I brought home my laptop, and I was getting on the train, and I had a doctor's appointment that night just to make a checkup. And I knew Steve would be on that train, and I'm like, I want to start writing. I don't want to run into him. He always had beers. I'm like, I don't want to have a beer before I go to the doctor's office, and so I purposely avoided him, and I started writing a couple of pages, and finally this year, after 17 years, and meeting a guy named Jeff Ingber, who's a tremendous writer, the book was finished 17 years later, called Shattered Lives, and we talk about Steve and my father, and we talk about the politics of terrorism, and the fact that we never want to forget. It's such an important point that, we as a country, Steve, as we said before, sort of move on, but we can't forget what happened.
Right.
And we have to keep fighting terrorism, or this is going to happen again. I mean, it happened with my father in '75. It happened with Steve in 2001. We've had other attacks. And I just want Americans to know that this can happen again, and it will happen again. And we just need to be vigilant and not let the people who were murdered die in vain. We have to serve justice to those who attack us.
Well said. Joe Conner, thank you very much for joining us today.
Anytime, Steve. Take care.
You bet. All right, it is 6:30 now here in New York City. Changing gears, Fox News alert. Hurricane Florence strengthening to a Category 4 storm as it heads straight for the Carolinas. We're live where it's supposed to hit the hardest, coming up. And a brand new revelation about the man who opened fire at a Border Patrol agent, what we just learned about his past. Plus, our next guest went to West Point after 9/11 knowing he would face war. Now, 17 years later, he's a combat vet who's running for the U.S. Senate. He will help us reflect on this somber commemoration.
We are back with a Fox News alert. Category 4 Hurricane Florence heading straight to the East Coast. More than 1 million people in the Carolinas, Maryland, and Virginia now warned to get out.
People are filling their cars with last-minute groceries and filling sandbags as well. The massive hurricane could make landfall as soon as Thursday, they're predicting.
President Trump has spoken with FEMA and is closely monitoring the Category 4 hurricane. He's also talked to the governors in those areas that are going to get hit. The storm is packing winds of up to 150 miles per hour.
All right.
Look at that image.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Wow.
All right, 17 years later, and Americans will never forget the victims of the terror attacks on 9/11.
That day bringing us into a larger battle with terror around the world, one that we are still fighting 17 years later.
John James is a combat veteran and now a Michigan Senate candidate, was part of the first class at West Point to swear the oath of affirmation on after September 11th, with the understanding that he was going to be going to war. John James joins us now to reflect on these 17 years at war with terror. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Really
Tell
appreciate
us your
being back.
story. Where were you? We all remember where we were when we heard the news.
Of course. Ironically, I was between my American politics class and my econ class. I remember
at West Point.
At West Point, yes. I graduated West Point in 2004, but before that, of course, in 2001, leaving class, I remember walking through the rotunda, walking up to Washington Hall and hearing whispers and echoes in the hallway about planes hitting towers, and a lot of us thought it was a movie because it's surreal. It couldn't be real that a plane had hit a tower. By the time I got to econ class, everybody saw one tower smoking. No one really knew what was going on. And West Point is just 40 miles north of here, right up the Hudson. And we watched, and as the next plane hit, and we stayed and we watched as one tower fell, and the second tower fell, and we watched our American brothers and sisters die right before our eyes. But the thing that was really surreal to us is sitting right there in that classroom, we're thinking, somebody has to do something about this, and silently realizing that we're the ones that America looks to do something about this.
And what was that like when you realized, I'm going to battle?
Well, as a 20-year-old, a 19, 20-year-old, you have to think about this. The people who are leading heroes into combat are just kind of kids themselves. Yeah. We ask our service members and our leaders to do so much, to take on obligations that are so heavy and big, but they do it because they love their country. It was an honor to serve with them. But walking back through the hallways with teenagers, 18, 19, 20-year-old sons and daughters of this nation who willingly take the oath and who are willing to lead and serve the best and brightest of America, looking back and forth and knowing that you had people who had your back and would always have your back. Not only did we swear that oath of affirmation, but our class, the class of 2004, we've lost the most among any class for the global war on terror. And I just want to remember my classmates and their families today.
Wow. So when you were in class, being that we had the embassy bombings in '97 and then you had the Cole bombing in 2000, were your professors, were your officer professors teaching you, hey, this is going to be the battle? This is coming to a head soon?
Great point. At West Point, we have a number of captains and majors and lieutenant colonels who are more seasoned, who've been preparing their entire careers to lead us into combat, because as we come out as lieutenants, we look to these men and women to lead us effectively. After having that background, they understood the groundswell of terror that was coming around the world. This is a dangerous place, and as the world becomes a more and more dangerous place, we need combat veterans on the floor of the U.S. Senate who understands how to keep Americans safe because they've done it before. This is serious business, and so I'm prepared to do what I can to continue my service to the nation and to continue my service to my state, and it's an outstanding obligation and honor.
John, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, why should people go to the polls and vote for you as the next senator?
Sure. I grew up in Detroit. I graduated from high school in 1999, graduated from West Point in 2004, became a Ranger qualified Apache pilot, and flew 750 hours of combat in Baghdad. I came back home because when I was over in Iraq, I was beamed back message on Fox and CNN and Armed Forces Network, areas of home, areas of Detroit, Pontiac, Flint, Benton Harbor, areas of home that looked worse than the combat zone I was flying in. And it really irked me that I didn't feel like there were enough folks fighting for Michiganders back home. And what did we need coming out of the Great Recession? We needed jobs. We needed someone who would fight for more jobs for Michiganders. So I went back home to join the family business, an automotive logistics company, and helped create 100 additional jobs and grew my family business from $35 million to $137 million.
Whoa.
I believe that we need more people on the floor of the U.S. Senate who understands what it's like to sign the front and the back of a check, how to continue to make sure we take care of people and take care of our economy, grow our markets, but also someone who understands what it takes to keep America safe.
I know the president's a big believer in you. For your family, are they believing that you're a Republican? Because they were Democrats, right?
Well,
they are Democrats.
I was raised by parents who were abandoned by the Democratic Party. These are people who remember when Kennedy stood up in front of the nation and said, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And this new far-left Democrat Party is asking the exact opposite. It's all about me. It's all about I. It's all about free stuff, not a fair shot. And what we're about, the Republican Party, is a party of freedom. It's the party of emancipation. It's the party of suffrage. It's the party of unity and opportunity. And that is what I'm focused on bringing. Understanding, making tough life and death decisions in split seconds in the toughest of environments, from the battlefield to the boardroom. That's the skill set and temperament that we need representing Michigan on the floor of the U.S. Senate.
He would like to be the next U.S. Senator from the great state of Michigan. John James, thank you, sir,
yes,
for joining us live.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for your service.
It's hard to bet against you. All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thanks for your service.
Yes.
You haven't met Jillian yet, but just trust me, she's over your shoulder. Okay, don't make a move. Jillian, you can take it away.
We said hello in the green room.
Oh, you did?
Yes, from a distance. Hello, good morning. Let's get you caught up on your headlines right now. And some really shocking video that catches the moment a traffic stop turns into a point-blank shootout with police. We do want to warn you, you may find this video disturbing.
Hey, I'm going to have you step out of the vehicle. Okay. You don't have anything on you, right?
Isn't that unreal? The LAPD just releasing the video of the July shooting. The unidentified female officer is recovering after being hit in the leg. The suspect was killed by return fire. The man who opened fire at a Border Patrol agent had previously been deported from the U.S. The Mexican national known as El Checo has a criminal record, including human smuggling. Investigators say he shot at an agent who was sitting inside his car in San Diego. That agent was not hurt. The suspect is in custody. A Broadway legend invoking a presidential assassin when asked about President Trump.
Where is John Wilkes Booth when you need him? Right? Will I be on an enemy's list? My God, I hope so.
Well, that's actress Carol Cook referencing the actor John Wilkes Booth, who shot President Lincoln in the head in 1865. She now joins celebrities like Snoop Dogg, Johnny Depp, and Kathy Griffin, who have joked about or referenced violence against the president. From the boxing ring to the political ring, Oscar De La Hoya says he's considering a run for the White House.
Why don't you, stand up and have a bigger voice? And obviously the biggest voice you can have is being president. The numbers are right, and they tell me that it looks good. I'm going to go for it.
Oh, the Boxing Hall of Famer says he's put together a team to look into his chances. The Los Angeles native won Olympic gold in 1992 before winning 10 titles. And by the way, he does believe strongly in standing for the national anthem. Just a little side note there.
Yeah, he's from Los Angeles, Olympic champion, and I would say this, an unbelievable business person. He's done an incredible job as a promoter.
Well, we'll see what happens.
We will. All right, thank you, Jillian.
More than 1 million people are on the move as this massive hurricane is taking aim at our East Coast. We are live on the ground in North Carolina, where that mass exodus is already underway. Next.
Let us take you to the west face of the Pentagon, where we are awaiting the annual unfurling of the American flag. It was American Airlines Flight 77 that crashed into the west side. They killed 125 people at the Pentagon 17 years ago today.
And it was so amazing because there's only this surveillance video available that looks like shutters. And a lot of people were theorizing, well, the plane didn't really hit because they rebuilt so quick and there was so little remnants of it. But the whole area was destroyed, almost eviscerated. And amongst these scenes that were described was Donald Rumsfeld with his sleeves rolled up, helping to pull out the bodies.
Here we are 17 years later, and it is always a beautiful sight to see the huge American flag unfurled on the west side of the Pentagon. It is near the 9/11 memorial. They do this at this time because it is sunrise.
As you see, the whole entire wing of that Pentagon has been rebuilt since. And one of the benefits of not having to deal with, the bureaucracy was if you're the Pentagon, it's up to the Pentagon to rebuild. They rebuild rapidly.
The red, white, and blue representing those men and women who have died, who paid this who made the ultimate sacrifice, and all of your families. We remember you. We think of you today. We all have memories of 9/11 and where we were on that morning.
It was the deadliest terror attack on American soil in history.
2,997 people lost their lives and more since due to the swirling cancer agents that were down on 9/11. We heard about that yesterday. Keep in mind, too, when you think of the Pentagon, not everyone's in the military. There's a lot of civilians who work in the Pentagon who lost their lives that day just because they were sitting at their desk.
And don't forget the 64 people who were on board that airplane when it crashed into the Pentagon as well. All right. We will never forget. Meanwhile, turning now to extreme weather. 4 states under states of emergency as Hurricane Florence, now Cat 4, barreling toward the Carolinas.
More than 1 million people ordered to evacuate ahead of the storm, and we're still a couple of days ahead.
We have team coverage on Hurricane Florence with Janice Dean here in the Weather Center and Jonathan Siri, who is live in Wrightsville Beach, North Carolina. Jonathan, we'll go to you since you're there on the beach. What's the latest?
Yeah, good morning, Ainsley. You can see this is the calm before the storm, and people are using this time to prepare. President Trump has approved emergency declarations for the states of South and North Carolina. This frees up federal funding to assist with state and local responses to this potentially catastrophic storm. Earlier, the president tweeted, quote, "My people just informed me that this is one of the worst storms to hit the East Coast in many years, also looking like a direct hit on North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia. Please be prepared, be careful, and be safe." People are taking the storm seriously. We've seen them stocking up on fuel, water, and other emergency supplies. At a gas station near Wilmington, we saw cars lined up as they waited for a fuel truck to replenish supplies. Although the immediate concern is the coast, Florence is expected to bring heavy rains far inland.
We had to do a lot of rescues during Hurricane Matthew, Hurricane Floyd, Hurricane Fran. We mapped out areas we know where flooding can likely occur, so there will be some inland evacuations as well.
Yeah, potentially evacuations hundreds of miles inland. Meanwhile, in South Carolina, Governor Henry McMaster has ordered mandatory evacuations of 8 coastal counties, including the popular tourist destination of Charleston. Starting at noon today, state highway officials will be reversing lanes on 4 major highways, including Interstate 26, so that all traffic will lead away from the coast. The governor estimates this will affect approximately 1 million people. But Steve, Ainsley, and Brian, he says it is worth it to protect lives. You don't want to take any chances with this powerful storm. Back to you.
Right about that. All right, Jonathan, thank you.
My sister's a school teacher in Charleston trying to get out. All the flights are sold out on going out of Charleston right now. So trying to get her to New York, but she might have to go to a different airport.
All right. Meanwhile, Janice Dean joins us with the weather. Hey, Janice.
Yeah, we're going to get a new advisory as of 8 a.m. because we now have watches, hurricane watches in effect for the Carolinas. The storm is strengthening. It's going through what we call an eye wall replacement cycle. That means the outer eye wall takes over for the inner eye wall. And all that means is we could potentially have a Category 5 later on today. And we do anticipate at least a Category 4 as it makes landfall across the Carolinas. That's the center of the storm where you see that 4, but anywhere from the South Carolina area up towards Virginia, you need to pay close attention. We still don't know the exact location of where the eye is going to come inland. So there's the tropical models, and as you can see, the big problem here is this storm could slow down and dump incredible historic amounts of rainfall, not only along the coast, but inland. And of course, we've got the storm surge, the hurricane force winds. We could also see tornadoes. Back to you.
And they're all those models are going straight to the Carolinas.
Yep.
All right, JD, thank you.
Thanks, Janice. Hey, we're FBI lovers Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, part of a scheme to leak stories to the press. Judge Andrew Napolitano with the details.
We will never forget. Today, on the 17th anniversary of the September 11th terror attacks, families of the victims will gather to pay tribute.
In just a few hours, a solemn ceremony will begin to honor the nearly 3,000 lives lost. Our New York Fox affiliate reporter Kerry Drew joins us live from Ground Zero. Kerry?
Jillian and Rob, good morning to both of you. It is always a somber day here in New York City and across the country. In just a few hours, as you mentioned, there will be a big ceremony here in Lower Manhattan. Friends and family members will gather to remember the nearly 3,000 men and women who were killed on 9/11 17 years ago today. There will be 6 moments of silence during today's ceremony. The first will begin at 8:46 a.m. That will mark the exact moment when the first plane crashed into the North Tower. There will be another moment of silence at 9:03 a.m. to mark the time when the second plane crashed into the South Tower. Then at 9:37, when American Airlines Flight 77 crashed into the Pentagon. At 9:59 a.m. to mark the moment when the South Tower collapsed. The moment of silence at 10:03 will mark when United Airlines Flight 93 crashed into a field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania. The final moment of silence will be at 10:28, and that is when the North Tower collapsed. Now, throughout the morning, victims' names will be read by loved ones, and we can expect security to be very tight here in Lower Manhattan today. Thousands of people expected to come and pay their respects. So that's the latest live from here in Lower Manhattan. Rob and Jillian, I'll send things back to you.
All right, thank you very much, Carrie. Carrie Drew reporting live. It is a blue-collar boom. President Trump's economy has middle-class workers winning.
We're going to win so much, you may even get tired of winning. And you'll say, please, please, it's too much winning.
All right, so will it last is the big question. Here with expert analysis, a senior fellow for the National Taxpayers Union, Maddie Duppler. Thank you so much, Maddie, for coming on this morning.
Of course.
Good morning. These are great numbers. These should help Republicans in the midterms, and it sounds like they're going to need some help. What do you make of what we see here?
Well, I think last week we saw a lot of good news for the economy. And of course, this is building on months and months of good news for the economy. You saw earlier that the expansion of blue-collar worker jobs is really just the last data point where we know the economy is not only working for employers, but for workers as well. And this really belies the left's point. The left has been trying to cast the tax reform plan and Trump's deregulatory agenda as something that only helps the upper echelons of society. And we simply know that that's not true. We know workers are feeling the effects, not only because we saw data last week that said wages are rising, but now we know that jobs are becoming more available in some of those sectors that have remained sticky in the last couple of years. That's mining, construction, manufacturing. We've seen a lot of enthusiasm from employers on manufacturing, and now we know workers are feeling the bump as well.
I think a lot of people, Maddie, say, okay, things look great right now, but what's going to happen 6 months from now, a year from now, 2 years from now? How long do you think we can sustain this?
Well, frankly, what we have seen over the last year and a half with President Trump is a fundamental rewriting of the way that our laws are aligned to induce business investment here in the United States. So really, if things continue, we can see an impact here for years and years to come. And yesterday, the House Ways and Means Committee announced that it will be doing Tax Reform 2.0. What that means is they'll be making permanent a lot of the tax cuts in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So with that change in the law, having permanent changes to some of the onerous parts of our tax code, that means that the economy could really be churning for years and years to come, which is very exciting news, because what we need certainty for businesses and workers moving forward. We need businesses to be able to invest for the long term, and that's what will continue to spur growth for the economy here at home.
Maddie, there's so much information on the economy. There's so much data that comes in. And what's frustrating is that for most people, it's hard to determine. And in this case, President Obama has been very capable of convincing the left that he's responsible for the uptick. Right. And President Trump has also been very capable of convincing the right that it's his economy.
Right.
How do you determine if you're just, somebody sitting at home?
Well, how you determine that generally is looking at your own circumstances. I always say people don't vote with their checkbooks. They vote how they feel about their checkbooks. So with this good economic data, you're right. You can kind of go put your green eye shades on and you can see a lot of different numbers in front of you and ask what it means. But Americans right now feel more confident in their own economic circumstances. They have a job, and not only do they have a job, if they don't like their job, they know they can leave and find another one because there are more jobs than workers available right now. Their own wages are rising. They're starting to see not only the tax cuts show up in their paychecks, but they're seeing their paychecks get bigger as a result of wages increasing. And employers are investing back in their workers. They're becoming more productive. So all of the metrics in the economy really are showing an uptick, but it's how people feel. It's their circumstances changing. And that's why when you see President Obama try to take credit for this economy, it's almost laughable, because for years he tried to tell Americans they were better off, but people didn't feel that way. And so now that they feel that way, they know that because Trump has removed some of the barriers workers and the economy, they get to be better off in their own circumstances at home.
All right, Maddie Depler, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Time now to check in with Steve Doocy, see what's coming up on Fox and Friends. Hey, Steve.
Hey, Rob. Hey, Jillian. Good morning to you. You know, it was 17 years ago today. We were here on the air when the whole world changed. We're talking about what happened in Lower Manhattan, in Washington, D.C., and Shanksville, Pennsylvania on September the 11th, 2001. We are live in all those locations later today. Plus, we're going to show you images that are so shocking, but at the same time remind you of what happened. We only show them once a year, and you'll see them this morning. Also, we have some great guests. Rudy Giuliani, who was mayor of New York City at the time. John James, who's running for the U.S. Senate in Michigan. He's got a story about 9/11, as does Congressman Scott Taylor. We've got a busy 3 hours, and we'll also have the very latest